We love sports because of the stories. So without context, these clips of Poland keeping England out in 1973 are interesting, but only slightly. But when you know that this loss kept England out of the 1974 World Cup, the game suddenly takes on a whole lot more significance. That's why Rob McFarlane's famous awful tackle took place. It was an act of desperation to try to keep England in the running. Well, without the storyline and the drama, you would still have the game, sure, but you and I likely would not watch sports just to watch people compete. I mean, ask yourself this question. If you're at school, do you watch a lot of intramural games? Do you watch a lot of pickup games of basketball or whatever? Anyway, you need to know the culture of the teams and the history behind what's going on. We need to know the history and the context, the triumph and the frustration, both the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Hong Kong scoring against China itself is always big because of the politics. However, Hong Kong beating China to keep them out of the 1986 World Cup is something completely different. America scoring against England is always going to be memorable. However, America scoring twice in this friendly was significant because Graham Taylor's England was in the middle of a failed campaign to qualify for America's World Cup in 1994. And this incredible goal by San Marino against England is only more powerful when you know the full historical context behind what's happening. That's actually one of the reasons why I make these YouTube videos. It's all about telling those stories from the past. You might know some of these stories already, but there are others that you might not know. But the funny thing is that we play Football Manager for the stories as well. You know, for a notoriously addictive game, Football Manager really doesn't do immersion all that well. No matter where you play, the menus stay the same, the reporters ask the same questions, the stadiums look the same, and the players more or less act similar. Sure, some countries are less developed than others, and those of you who have too much time in your hands can try to build a nation saves in countries like Taiwan. But for the vast majority of nations and leagues in the game, the only real difference is cosmetic, different names, and maybe some different stats, and that's it. You know, the thing that really makes Football Manager satisfying is the immersion that you bring to the game yourself. If you treat this game just as another video game, you'll feel frustrated by the old-fashioned graphics and the lack of any flashy features. However, when you bring in your imagination, when you get to know your players, and when you really start to care about the game, that's when you really get hooked. Now, there are some things you can do in Football Manager to become more immersed. For example, you could actually play through the games. This might sound shocking, but a lot of people play Football Manager mostly on holiday mode. Some do so for a reason, usually to test out tactics or for some sort of long-term strategic testing. Some do crazy tests of attributes for websites like FM Arena. Now, I'm not entirely sure if the match engine is any different in holiday mode than it is when you actually play out the match highlights. That is a controversial topic that people have been arguing about online for years. However, I do know that you're missing out on a lot of the fun if you just holiday through every season. Now, I do want to be careful about this part. There are a lot of Football Manager YouTubers who have a much larger audience than I do that use that holidaying method. And honestly, I've tried it myself, but I never really liked it. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I don't really know the players if I haven't spent time watching them play, trying them out in different positions, talking with them in game, thinking about their training, and so on. I'm not saying that it's bad to play holiday saves, and I know that the realities of content creation will force most of us into playing the game that way, but it's just not immersive to me. Now, there's a lot of stuff in Football Manager that I find really annoying. Press conferences, for example. I'm still flabbergasted at how in the world Sports Interactive could put together such a boring and unimaginative system for press interaction. So most of us just stick the assistant manager, the ass man, out to the press conference and just call it a day. And if you really want to do it yourself, there is a trick you can use so you always get it right. Just choose the second answer from the left. It's always the right answer, and it will ensure that none of your players have their morale negatively impacted by some stupid thing you said. But I'm going to tell you a secret. Press conferences will likely change soon. Now, I'm not talking about FM26, which apparently is coming out. I don't know what SI is going to do for press conferences there, though I assume it won't be great. Nope, I'm talking about the files that dictate press conferences in Football Manager as it currently stands. Now these are all XML files and they're sitting in one of the FMF files that come with the game. Since they're XML files, they can be edited, and I think a lot of work can be done to improve them. So anyway, stay tuned as we work on this. But of course, there's a little bit more to Football Manager than just shouts from the touchline in press conferences. There's not much more, but there are a few things here and there. There are player interactions, for example. I've talked before about the awful ones, the stupid meetings where the players are upset, you can't do anything about it, morale tanks, and everybody winds up on the transfer list in the end. But there are a few positive ones, like telling players that they trained well. I hate doing that one. I think everybody hates it. It's not a bad mechanic in theory, but the way that it's implemented feels so empty and useless. If you put your arm around the player, it makes no difference. There's no way to tell immediately if your talk had a good effect or not. I get the feeling that any system would be better than this one. And you know, the morale system is pretty realistic, even though it gets on my nerves all the time. If you've ever tried to cheat your way through Football Manager, you know that the game becomes boring if there's no drama. You always need somebody to be upset, it's just no fun otherwise. And you know, in the spirit of storylines, I really strongly recommend just going along with whatever the game gives you. We all have, you know, the headcanon, the story in our head about what's really going on with our save, but you need to be flexible with your headcanon. Let the game dictate things instead of just fighting against the game every inch of the way. It's not so much fun in the short term when you lose your top striker or whatever, but it will make the save much more meaningful in the long term. The other thing you can do is be flexible with your tactics. If you're like me, you gave up on making tactics long ago and just downloaded the Knap tactics from the forums. But honestly, it's time to do it the right way. Tactics are of course a big part of the game, and using overpowered tactics just isn't fun after a while. Plus, if you treat tactics right, you can use some of the data features of the game to at least try to figure out how to approach each match. Now, I'm going to be honest, the data features are really underdeveloped. They're mostly different ways of looking at the same old numbers, graphs with no real substance. However, you can always make decisions about which players to key or even which players to start based on the data that you looked at. And you know, in terms of immersion and headcanon, you can simply tell yourself that the analysts working for your club aren't quite good enough. In fact, if you're an old guy like me, you can just shake your head and ask what in the world is wrong with kids these days. Well, my last suggestion for increasing immersion is to simply give the game time. Every save winds up being an adventure after a few seasons. The longer you play, the more chances there are of really interesting storylines to brew up. Look at it this way, if you started watching this 1979 Vancouver-New York NASL playoff game, you would wonder if you're not just wasting your time. After giving time for the drama of the match to unfold, however, you start understanding that something really special was going on here. The more of the context that you understand, the more interesting the story becomes, even if it seemed pointless in the beginning. And you know, that's the way the Football Manager is. So sure, you can holiday through everything to tell people that you've accomplished this and that in the game. But if you really want to have fun, my recommendation is to slow things down and treat the game seriously. And as always, my hope is that Sports Interactive will figure out what its fans actually want. The thing is, we want immersion above all else. And hey, who knows, maybe the next version will have more of that.